A man regrets abandoning his home and family to pursue another life, believing he deserved more. However, as time passed, he discovered something unimaginable when he returned to search for his family. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. One sunny afternoon, a 66-year-old man named Victor strolled through a small park, his body carrying the weight of age and his expression reflecting a mixture of sorrow and contentment. He sat on a bench, gazing around the park as if searching for something. Across from him, an elderly woman in a wide-brimmed hat sat feeding birds, her hands scattering seeds with practiced ease. She noticed him out of the corner of her eye and offered him a gentle smile. "Good morning," she said softly. Victor nodded, returning her greeting. "Good morning," he replied, though his voice was heavy, his thoughts far away. After a long pause, he sighed. I'm not sure if everything is all right, to be honest." The woman's eyes were kind, and she tilted her head as she looked at him. "Well," she said, continuing to feed the birds, "I'm not sure if I'm the best person to help, but I enjoy sitting here, feeding these birds, and today I've got plenty of time. If you feel like talking, I'm happy to listen." Victor hesitated for a moment, glancing down at his hands. His fingers trembled slightly, a sign of both his age and the emotional weight he carried. "Thank you," he murmured. "My name is Victor, and I think I just need to tell someone my story. The story of the choices I made, the life I led." Victor had once been a man who lived for the moment, reveling in every experience life had to offer. Parties, spontaneous travel, and fleeting relationships were what defined him. He had built a successful career for himself, owning a marketing agency that had taken off in his 20s. The money rolled in, allowing him the freedom to indulge in every whim, to go wherever he pleased, to avoid responsibility at all costs. The concept of settling down or committing to something long-term never appealed to him. His parents, though not wealthy, had always supported him, proud of the success he had achieved. They were kind and generous, but they had never pushed him to be more responsible or grounded. Victor never cared much for school, but he didn't need to. His charm, wit, and good looks had always been enough to get him through. People were drawn to him, and wherever he went, he was the center of attention. Women adored him, but Victor was never one for commitment. He moved from one relationship to the next, never staying long enough to form real bonds. Then one day, everything changed when he met Elena. She was different from the other women he had known, intelligent, grounded, and self-assured. Elena wasn't just another admirer of Victor's charm. She saw through his exterior and recognized the potential for something more. It wasn't long before the two of them were wrapped up in a whirlwind romance. Their connection was deeper than anything Victor had experienced before, and for the first time, he found himself questioning whether he could change his ways. Their friends were shocked to see Victor in a committed relationship. He had always been the quintessential bachelor, and many doubted that this new phase would last. Elena's close friends, Dylan and Carla, were especially skeptical. They had heard stories about Victor's past and knew that commitment had never been his strong suit. They warned Elena to be careful, to guard her heart, but Elena was in love. She believed in Victor and thought that their love was strong enough to change him. "People can change," she told them whenever they voiced their concerns. "He loves me, and that's enough." Elena was everything Victor had never thought he needed: kind, compassionate, loyal, and incredibly intelligent. She worked as a nurse, dedicating her life to helping others, and she brought out a side of Victor that few had ever seen. About a year into their relationship, Elena shared exciting news with Victor. She was pregnant. She was glowing with happiness, her eyes sparkling as she spoke of their future together. Victor smiled and embraced her, but deep inside, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. He quickly brushed it aside, focusing on the joy of the moment. The news spread quickly among their circle of friends. Dylan and Carla congratulated Elena, but exchanged worried glances. They knew Victor's history and couldn't shake the feeling that he might not be ready for the responsibilities of fatherhood. But Elena was confident. She believed that their love was enough to hold everything together. Victor, too, wanted to believe that he had changed. A few weeks after learning about the pregnancy, he proposed to Elena. He had always avoided marriage, but now, with a child on the way, he thought that perhaps starting a family would help him become a better man. He proposed during a small dinner party with close friends, and Elena, overwhelmed with joy, said yes immediately. They began planning their wedding and the life they would build together. But in the quiet moments, Victor couldn't help but wonder if he had made the right decision. Their wedding took place 3 months into Elena's pregnancy, and it was a beautiful event. Friends and family gathered to celebrate their union, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. Victor was happy, or at least he appeared to be. But in the quieter moments, when the excitement of the day faded and he was left alone with his thoughts, Victor began to feel a sense of unease. He had always lived a life free of responsibilities, and now, with a family on the horizon, he wasn't sure he was ready for the change. When their son, James, was born, Victor was overjoyed. He had never felt anything like the love he experienced when he held his son for the first time. James was perfect, and for the first few months, Victor threw himself into fatherhood with surprising enthusiasm. He spent hours playing with the baby, feeding him, and watching him sleep. It was a new experience for Victor, and for a time, he convinced himself that he had finally found a new purpose in life. But as the months passed, the weight of responsibility began to wear on him. He found himself longing for the freedom he had once enjoyed. One afternoon, while out walking with Elena and James, Victor spotted a group of his old friends sitting at an outdoor cafe. They were laughing, drinking, and reminiscing about old times, the life Victor had once known and loved. Seeing them carefree and unburdened hit Victor hard. He realized how much he missed that life. Elena noticed the change in Victor almost immediately. He became more withdrawn, quieter. He still played with James and helped around the house, but the spark in his eyes had faded. He seemed distant, as if his mind were somewhere else. One night, after putting James to bed, Victor sat in the living room, staring at the TV, but not really watching. Elena noticed and asked if he was okay, but he just nodded, not offering any explanation. She didn't press him, but she knew something was wrong. The next morning, Elena woke to find that Victor wasn't in bed. She assumed he had gone out for an early morning run, as he sometimes did. But when she went into the kitchen, she found an envelope on the table with her name on it. Her heart sank as she opened it. Inside was a letter from Victor, explaining that he couldn't do this anymore. He loved her and James, but the life they had built wasn't for him. He had left most of his money to her and their son, but he needed to leave. He asked her not to try to find him. Elena was devastated. She collapsed onto the kitchen floor, the weight of his abandonment crushing her. She had known that something was wrong, but she had never expected this. She called Dylan and Carla, who rushed over to comfort her. They had always suspected that this might happen, but seeing their friend in so much pain was heartbreaking. They didn't say, "I told you so," but Elena could see it in their eyes. They had been right all along. Far away, in Santa Monica, Victor began his new life. He used the money he had earned from his business to live comfortably, indulging in the same carefree lifestyle he had enjoyed before. He partied, traveled, and surrounded himself with new people, trying to forget the family he had left behind. For years, he convinced himself that he had made the right decision, that this was the life he was meant to live. But as the years went by, Victor's life started to unravel. His once vast fortune dwindled, and by the time he reached his mid-60s, the friends who had once surrounded him were gone. They had disappeared as soon as his money ran out. Victor tried calling them, but no one answered. The parties had ended, and now he was alone. At 65, Victor was evicted from his apartment. He had never bought a home, assuming he would always have enough money to keep renting. Now he had nothing, with no one to turn to. He took a job at a small grocery store, earning just enough to survive. The once successful businessman had been reduced to a simple life, scraping by on minimum wage and the kindness of strangers. One of those strangers was his young neighbor, Ben, who had taken a liking to Victor. Ben often helped Victor with groceries or covered a bill when he couldn't afford to pay. Victor appreciated the help, though he felt ashamed of how far he had fallen. Still, Ben's kindness was a small light in the darkness of Victor's life. As the years passed, Victor found himself thinking more and more about the family he had left behind. He wondered what had become of James, if he had grown up resenting his father for abandoning him. The guilt weighed heavily on Victor, and he longed to see his son, to make amends for the mistakes he had made. With what little money he had left, Victor decided to return to the city where he had once lived with Elena and James. It was a long journey, both physically and emotionally, but he knew he needed to try. When he arrived, he found that the house they had lived in was gone, sold years ago. No one in the neighborhood remembered Elena or James. They had moved on, just as Victor had feared. He spent months searching for any trace of his family. He took odd jobs to support himself, working in diners or small shops, always moving from place to place. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find them. A year passed, and Victor's health began to fail. His body, worn down from years of neglect, could no longer keep up with the demands of his search. One evening, Victor collapsed in the small apartment he had rented. Ben found him and called for an ambulance. At the hospital, Victor was treated by a kind doctor named Tessa. She was gentle and patient with him, listening to his story as she ran tests and monitored his condition. She encouraged him to take better care of himself, to rest and recover, but Victor explained that he couldn't afford to stop working. Tessa, moved by his story, offered him a place to stay in her family's guest house while he recovered. Victor was hesitant at first, not wanting to impose, but Tessa insisted. She and her husband had an extra room, and she didn't mind helping out someone in need. Victor was grateful and accepted her offer. A few days later, Tessa's husband arrived at the guest house, carrying a set of clothes for Victor. As he handed the clothes to Victor, something about him seemed familiar. Victor squinted at the man, trying to place where he had seen him before. "What's your name?" Victor asked, his voice quiet. The man smiled gently. "It's James." Victor's heart skipped a beat. He looked at the man standing before him, the son he had abandoned so many years ago. Overcome with emotion, Victor fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "James, I'm so sorry," he whispered. James knelt down beside his father, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, Dad," he said softly. "I forgave you a long time ago." Tessa watched from the doorway, her heart swelling with emotion as father and son embraced for the first time in decades. The pain of the past began to fade, replaced by the hope of a new future. Back in the park, Victor finished telling his story to the elderly woman beside him. She listened quietly, her eyes filled with understanding. "You found your son," she said gently. "That's what matters now. You need to forgive yourself for the past. Let it go." Victor nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "Thank you," he said softly. "What's your name?" The woman removed her hat, and as she did, Victor's breath caught in his throat. Her face was familiar, impossibly so. "It's Elena," she said. Victor stared at her, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. Elena smiled gently. "It's okay, Victor. We both changed. We're not the same people we were back then, but that doesn't mean we can't move forward." From a distance, an elderly couple watched the exchange, their hands intertwined. "It seems like he's finally learned," the woman said softly. Her husband nodded. Better late than never. The couple, Dylan and Carla, smiled as they watched Victor and Elena, knowing that time had finally healed the wounds of the past. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.